So the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is the only real international agreement that we have that highlights supported decision-making. So in that sense, the very fact that there is such a convention is a new high water mark internationally, and the fact that the convention has this piece in it about supported decision-making and supporting it is very significant because it has linked international intention with intentions from individual governments around the world to make good faith efforts to essentially do two things. One is to reduce the use of guardianship as a kind of starting point, and to try to go with less invasive options such as supported decision making. And what we've seen is the growth of all kinds of pilot projects of people and groups trying to get some familiarity with supported decision making. And it is certainly the case that there's very little clarity in many instances about what supported decision making is or isn't. And that's kind of understandable when people aren't familiar with something. But it's also an opportunity to clarify what could be done that would be beneficial with supported decision making. And in this sense, stepping back from formal arrangements around supported decision making, the very fact that people with disabilities are seen as decision makers in their own life and that they could be supported to be good decision makers in their own life itself is a major victory in terms of respect for the will and priorities of the people with disabilities. And many people aren't familiar with how supported decision-making works, but it's essentially guided by the individual themselves, or at least that's the key principle, is that the person themselves would decide who are their supporters and agree as to what sort of areas they want support with their decision-making, and therefore create a role of decision-maker that might not formally been present or recognized in the person's life. This means then that the particular decisions that a given individual is interested in making a priority can be therefore different from another person's decisions that they find they would like support with. So in that way, it allows for a diversity of exploration of the role of person with disabilities as a decision maker and a diversity of supporters. Because in the concept of supported decision making, the supporters don't have to be professionalized supporters, though they could be present. They simply are people that are trusted to some extent by the person with the disability. And it allows all kinds of people in the community to become involved with a person with a disability in a more intimate, personal way, in a role of being really a trusted supporter. And also almost a witness of what life is like for a person with a disability. So in that sense, it's a very consciousness-raising kind of opportunity for a lot of people. Now, it's also true that it's possible to implement supported decision-making in very unhelpful ways. And so in that sense, there has to be due diligence to be careful about how people are supported. And so in this sense, the idea of having demonstration projects that are studied and where the lessons are learned and where there's been some critique of what's going on has started to occur. And this is going to be helpful in identifying what might be thought of as desirable supported decision-making practices and less desirable decision-making practices. It is notable that there really isn't any clarity from an evaluation point of view of what it is that is quality in supported decision-making. This is going to emerge over time. So it is a quite crucial dimension of it. But it's a kind of chicken and egg kind of problem at this point, because you really have to get some experience with it to know what those quality dimensions should be. And that's the phase we're in now, of getting some initial experience with supported decision making. Though there would be jurisdictions like British Columbia that was an early pioneer of a version of supported decision making that now has a quite lengthy track record. But again, many people may not be familiar with what that track record is, or the track record isn't widely available outside of British Columbia. But it will be if it were available, it'd be very helpful for people looking at supported decision being undertaken in the long run. For instance, a very useful question is like, who is supported decision making for? Would it be supported decision making with adults? Would it be supported decision making with the people that have communication difficulties? Would it be supported decision making with people that are both disabled and may find themselves in trouble with the law? And as you look at the different groups, with children, with people with disabilities from different cultural backgrounds, you see that there's a diversity of challenges in supported decision making. So there's a great deal of learning ahead of us, trying to get our hands around some of these challenges. But of course, this isn't unprecedented. This would be very similar to implementing other forms of personalization. We've had very similar kinds of challenges of trying to find what might be thought of as a tailor-made solution to supported decision-making. One person at a time would be very similar to what's happened in services, of trying to develop individualized services and lifestyles, one person at a time. So in that sense, supported decision-making benefits from complementary efforts that have already preceded it in the sort of person-centered realm.